Welcome to Easter at Seabreeze. My name's Elliot, and I'm very glad that you decided to join us today. Our service is going to start in just a few minutes, and one of the ways that you can engage in the service is to participate in the chat. Actually, right now is a great time to just type your name in. We've got hosts available. They'll be interacting with you throughout the service. So let us know you're here and then engage in that during the service. We're going to kick it off with a few songs. As we sing the songs, what we're going to be focusing on is the fact that Jesus gave his life and then rose from the grave, proving that he can give us life. And so we're going to be singing about that and celebrating that through worship. If you know the song, sing along. If this is new to you, enjoy the music, but I would encourage you to really reflect on the words as we go through it. And then after the worship, Bevan, our senior pastor, he's going to deliver today's Easter message. And what he's going to talk about how God has given us minds and really wants us to use those minds well. And so in our thinking, he wants us to think before we speak and think before we decide. And actually in the Easter story, there are examples of people doing that in response to the story of the resurrection. So Bevan's going to talk about that. As he's speaking, consider maybe some things that challenge you or things that you might want to put into practice in your own life. So be doing that as he goes through the message. And then at the end, you can again chime in the chat, let us know what stood out to you. There will be a little time at the end to interact with others who are joining you online at the same time. If you want to give today, if you want the connection card, any of that stuff, it's all through the digital program. You can text the word Seabreeze to 474747 or just go on the Seabreeze website. Across the top, it'll say click here to get today's program. Click on that. You can open it up, see giving, message notes, connection card, all that stuff on there. Again, we are very glad that you decided to join us for Easter. Join us as we celebrate.
Well, hey guys, happy Easter and welcome here to Seabreeze. We're so glad you guys have all joined us today, whether you're here in person, here in the auditorium or out in the patio or joining us online. Welcome here. We're really glad you guys have chosen to celebrate Easter with us. We're going to sing a few songs together, and really the reason why we sing songs of worship is to get centered around the truth about God. So all of the songs this morning are themed around Christ's sacrifice for us and him being our Lord and our Savior. So we're gonna, let's all stand up and we're gonna sing a few songs as we start the service. the soldiers watched in vain, was borrowed for 3 days. His body there would not remain. Our God has robbed the grave. Our God has robbed the grave. Sing out your name. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. See him now, the King of heaven, Son of God, enthroned above. Heavy cross upon his shoulders, carried for us, carried for us. See him now, our King surrendered, final word of perfect love. Hear his cry, Father, forgive them. Spoken for us, spoken for us. When he said it is finished, oh, our hope had just begun. The grave has lost its hold. Arise, your stone is gone. Our God reigns forevermore. All praise to him belongs. The tide, his name alone. Jesus paid it all. Then he rose. Then he rose. Now we rise by his Spirit. In his name we overcome. All our hope in this same power, living in us, living in us. Oh, our sin is defeated. Oh, the war has now been won. The grave has lost its hold. Kings and kingdoms will bow down. Every chain will break as broken hearts declare His praise. But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before Him. So open up the gates. So open up the gates and wait before the King of Kings. The God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before Him. Let's sing, Who Can Stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before Him. Stop the Lord Almighty.
Good morning, guys. Happy Easter. Go ahead and grab a seat. I'm going to get us started with some announcements. My name's Elliot. To all of you joining us online, out on the patio, and then here in the auditorium, we're very glad that you came and joined us this morning. Bevan's going to kick off a new series of messages today titled Think. And this is going to be a really helpful series as we just talk about some of the challenges that we face to really think about the ideas that we're presented with. So we're going to kick that off this morning. Hope that you really enjoy it. It's going to be a lot of fun to get the series started and then in the coming weeks. But before he starts that, I've got a few things I want to make you aware of. The first one is the digital program. You can get a digital program on your phone. You can either go to the Seabreeze website, seabreezechurch.com, or you can text the word Seabreeze to the number 474747. You'll get a link response. When you open that up, you'll see a few different things on the digital program. You'll see a connection card. You can click on that if you've got prayer requests, if you've got questions about different opportunities to get involved, want more information about baptism, anything like that. You can do all of that through the connection card. you'll see a link to online message notes. This is a message you're going to want to take notes on, I can tell you that. So you can get that open. You can take notes, follow along as Bevan speaks today. And then there's also links for giving. So if you want to give online or if you're with us in person, there's a few different offering drop boxes spread around the campus. You want to make sure and get the digital program. Then on the calendar, there's a few things I want to highlight that we've got coming up. The first thing is next Sunday, we're going to have services at 9 o'clock and 10:30. So you want to make sure and make that adjustment for next Sunday, 9 o'clock and 10:30. And our student ministry is going to be launching something with the junior hires next week during the 9 o'clock service. They're going to have junior high programming. So for all the parents of students 6th through 8th grade, they're going to be able to go over to the warehouse for the 9 o'clock service, and then you parents can come in here. So they're starting that next week, and that'll go through the end of the school year. And another thing our student ministry has going on that's we're looking forward to is they're going to do a surf day on April 17th. So if you have students junior high up through high school, Andrew Mace is our student pastor. He leads that ministry. They've got a lot of exciting opportunities for the students to get involved. So if you see him walk around the campus today, ask him. He'd love to get you more information. But they've got a surf day coming up on April 17th. And then for all the rest of the parents, for parents of younger elementary and below, we have a parenting seminar coming up on April 24th. So that's just under 3 weeks away. We're going to have more information about that in the coming weeks, but we just wanted to get that on your radar, that on April 24th, we're going to have that parenting seminar right here at Seabreeze. Again, we're glad that you joined us today as we kick off this new series. I'm going to hand it off to Bevan as he gives us our Easter message. Bevan?
Thanks, Elliot. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Easter at Seabreeze. We're so glad that you've decided to join us today as we celebrate the day that Jesus shocked everyone and walked out of that tomb. Now, Jesus had publicly stated that he was going to rise from the dead in 3 days, but honestly, it was too incomprehensible for anyone to take that seriously. But then, of course, it did happen. And now at a distance of 2,000 years from that day, it's really easy for us to miss all of the confusion on the part of those who were there when the first resurrection reports started to trickle in. There was just a lot of confusion, as you would expect. The initial response was not to believe the resurrection, but to question it, to doubt whether it really had taken place. I mean, just listen to how the disciples, those closest to Jesus, responded to the reports of the women who had gone there on that Sunday morning and had found the tomb empty. And they came back to report to the disciples, and this is what we read in Luke 24, verses 9 through 11. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11, the disciples, and to the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. It just didn't make sense. Any thinking person, honestly, would respond this way to the news that someone had risen from the dead. Someone tells you someone's risen from the dead, I would hope that you would question it. If you just accepted it at face value, what that means is you're not thinking. And thinking is what makes us humans different from any other life form. We are not the biggest or the strongest or the sturdiest of creatures on this planet. If it wasn't for our minds, we would have long since passed from this earth. It is our minds that have protected us and have provided for us. And it was their minds on that Easter Sunday morning 2,000 years ago that kicked in and warned them that this was not something just to accept, not something to immediately believe, but this was going to require some thought in order to process. The kind of life that we build first takes shape in our minds, in our thoughts, and then it works its way out into visible reality. Now, this would be great if our thoughts never failed us, if we always thought accurately. But of course, that's not the case. We often think thoughts that turn out to be wrong, not just on paper, not just in a test, but in life. And that can be really devastating. And we often think thoughts that cause us to feel emotions that are wrong and destructive, not just in theory, not just in principle, but in actual pain that we feel and pain that we cause to those close to us. So you would think that our mistake-prone thinking past would make us more humble thinkers. But that is usually not the case. In the New Testament book of 1 Corinthians, we read this warning about arrogant thinking. This is the theme of this new series we're starting today. 1 Corinthians 8, verse 2 simply says this: "Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know." It's an invitation to humble thinking. Just because we think we know something doesn't mean that we do. In fact, it's arrogant thinking that tends to produce the lowest quality of thinking that we do. So it's not enough just to think that you know. There needs to be some reasons behind it. This past year, of course, was not what anyone thought it would be. It's not what any of us expected. And as we began a year ago to wrap our minds around what was happening, we all had thoughts of what was going to happen next. And we were almost always wrong, weren't we? We just didn't know what was coming. So you would think that this pandemic would have turned us all into a more humble bunch of thinkers. But that has not been the case. I mean, just listen to the conversations around you now. Just read the posts of what is being put online. And it's clear that our confidence in what we think is at an all-time high. Very few appear to be curious or puzzled or uncertain anymore. Now, I think part of the reason for that is many of our modern forms of communication do not promote curiosity or uncertainty or thought, for that matter. No one posts online, "I'm not really sure what I think about that." No one posts that. They may think that, but they're not going to post it. No one starts a blog entitled "Uncertain Musings." No one would read a blog. We want to read certain musings. Media outlets don't wait until they have all of the facts before they broadcast the story, because if they waited until they got all the facts, they'd be the last one to broadcast the story, and they would lose dollars if they were the last one. So every day, we are not challenged to think. Instead, we are told with absolute certainty what we are supposed to think. And even we are given the words to say, not just the thoughts to think. And while these forms of thought may be new, the platforms may be new, the technology may be new, the media outlets may be new in history, the arrogance that drives the modern mind is really nothing new. It's always been a part of the human heart, and therefore the human thought. We have always struggled with arrogant thinking. And so this morning, as we look at the Easter story, I think there are two very important lessons that come out of the Easter story that invite us to think humbly as we move into the future. I want to look at these two lessons this morning. The first lesson I want to draw attention to is this: wonder before you speak. Before you open your mouth and let everyone around you know your big idea, be sure you've spent time to wonder, to really ponder before you open your mouth. This is a lesson that was learned by Peter. Peter was one of the disciples of Jesus. And Peter, as you read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are the biographies of Jesus in the New Testament, you recognize that Peter was never slow to speak. He was usually full of something to say. And so as the days unfolded that led up to the crucifixion of Christ and the resurrection, as suddenly things began to take a different turn, Peter began to lead with his mouth. But in just 3 days, by the time the resurrection happens, Peter grows quiet, and he starts to wonder. He learns that you need to wonder before you speak. When Peter hears of the resurrection, along with the other disciples, we are given his particular response. It's in Luke 24, verse 12. This is what we read. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb, the empty tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. We don't hear any thoughts about Peter for quite some time. Peter went away wondering. So when Peter saw the empty tomb, did the light bulb suddenly go off in his head? Did immediately everything Jesus had said and taught about this moment, did it suddenly make sense? No. He went away chewing on it. He went away wondering. Why? Because what he was seeing with his eyes, this empty tomb, didn't fit with what he had thought was going to happen. Wondering is something that occurs whenever you encounter an experience or a thought that doesn't fit with what you had thought. Like everyone who thinks, Peter had a framework of thought already in place. It's just the way our minds work. We all do this. We don't just collect data and store it to be retrieved later as separate bits of information. No, we try to make sense of everything we see and everything we experience and everything we think. We try to make connections. No one's told us this, just the way our mind works. We just assume that things are supposed to connect to each other in some way. It's all supposed to fit together. Every human mind innately thinks this way. A way of describing this would be like our mind is convinced that everything is like a puzzle piece. So here's a picture of a puzzle and all the pieces of that puzzle. So you can see the picture, and then the work is to turn the puzzle pieces over and try to figure out which ones connect to which ones, and over time, eventually, complete the picture that's on the box, the front of the puzzle box. And this is the way our minds work. Whenever we encounter something, we automatically assume this is a puzzle piece. This goes somewhere. This fits somewhere. You hear a 2-year-old say why over and over and over again because, like every human mind, they know this has a reason. It goes somewhere, it fits with something, it connects to something, and it's part of a big something. So we all pick a picture, and then we try to fit everything into that picture frame of thought. Just 3 days earlier, Jesus had told Peter, along with the rest of his disciples, that he would die and that he would, in 3 days, come back to life. But rather than wonder about what Jesus had just said, Peter did the opposite of wonder. He spoke up. And he rebuked Jesus and said, Jesus, no, that can't be. You're wrong. Why did Peter speak up? It's because the idea of a dying Jesus was not a piece of data that fit into Peter's picture of how things should be. Now, Peter wasn't making up his own picture. None of us make up our own picture. We're not that smart. Like most people, Peter's thinking was reflecting the picture of his culture. Every culture adapts a picture, an idea of how the world is that tries to fit every piece of experience into that picture. And that was true for Peter. And in this picture, the Jewish picture of 2,000 years ago, Jesus, in Peter's thinking, fit in as the Messiah puzzle piece. You see, the Jews thought, for good reason, that the long-hoped-for Messiah would come and free them from the oppression of their rulers, in this case, Rome. And so when Peter had encountered Jesus and had observed the miracles and had listened to him teach, Jesus, in Peter's way of thinking, checked every Messiah box. And Peter had become convinced this was the Messiah, the promised Messiah. This is who this puzzle piece is. But when Jesus was arrested, as he had predicted on that night, Peter immediately drew his sword because, in Peter's way of thinking, this is the moment that we've all been waiting for when Jesus begins to throw off the power of Rome. These were Roman soldiers. Perfect moment. But then Jesus tells Peter to put his sword away. And he willingly goes with the Roman soldiers, knowing that he would go to his death. At that point, Peter's mind was officially blown. This didn't make sense. This didn't fit in to his understanding of the Messiah and where Jesus fit into everything. And now, 3 days later, reports came back that the tomb is empty, that Jesus had risen from the dead. That was way outside of the thought picture that Peter had been using to make sense of things for his entire life. It turns out that Peter's thought picture didn't have any room for a risen Christ. But now, there he is, staring at linen strips that he had seen wrapped around the dead body of Jesus, only now they're just laying there and there's no body. Now he's got a thought dilemma. His picture didn't fit with what he saw. Whenever you encounter something that doesn't fit with your understanding, it's time to wonder, not speak. What do you think Peter wandered away from the tomb thinking about? What was he wondering as he wandered away? My guess is he was wondering, have I been wrong about the picture that I've been using for my entire life about who the Messiah is and what he is supposed to do? That is a hard thing to think for anyone. It takes a lot of humility to wonder if you've been wrong for maybe your entire life. But it's in these disorienting, wandering moments of life that God invites us to do what might be our best thinking. So the question that we all need to ask is, what is the big picture that we are using to make sense of this world? Everyone has one. It's helpful to know what yours is. What is the picture on the puzzle box that you're trying to take every experience of your life and every thought and everything you see and everything that's going on in the world, and you're trying to fit it in there? What picture are you using? Our culture is in a place where we are debating between two predominant pictures. And I would describe them this way. We are debating between science and faith. Is science the picture of reality, or is faith the picture of reality? Now, the unfortunate thing is most people think that it's an either-or question, that we have to pick one and reject the other. But that's just not true. I would say that's not good thinking. It turns out both are very helpful. And in my thinking, both are true. Both are needed. But they come at the picture question from a different side. Science starts with the individual puzzle pieces. It knows nothing other than the data. Science is data-driven, puzzle piece-driven. So what science does is it takes the puzzle piece and it tries to figure out, where does it fit? What are the patterns? Comes up with hypotheses, then theories, then laws that describe this is how physical reality fits. And because it's so data-driven, when it does figure something out, it's really helpful because it's true. Faith starts at a different side. Faith starts with the creator of the picture, the painter, who then tells us where the pieces fit. It's coming at the same question from a different side. And it's not a question of which one is true, which one is right. It's a question of how big is your question. Science can answer some really important questions, but it cannot answer the big questions. This past Thursday, I went to the skin doctor with a question about my skin. The question is, any signs of cancer? Now that's a great question for science, particularly medical science. I am alive in part because of the advances of medical science. Years ago, the skin doctor found a spot of melanoma on my back. Wasn't sure if it was, sent it away for a biopsy. It was, and in a matter of weeks, I had surgery. Melanoma is fast growing. It spared my life. I am so grateful for medical science. That's why I go back every year. to see if there's any other problems. But on that morning of my appointment, I also prayed and I asked God to help the doctor spot any cancer. Why would I pray and go to the doctor? Well, it's because science is what people know so far. And that's a lot. But it's not everything. And that's why science today is very different than science was 50 years ago. If you just look at a science textbook from 50 years ago, it's got some really different ideas than the ones that are being read in the schools today. Not because they were all liars 50 years ago, but science has found some more puzzle pieces. And they've figured out that, no, you know what, that idea of how things fit together is not accurate. Now we understand this is how it is. That's why science is always learning. And sometimes it gets things wrong, and then it learns and corrects itself. So I prayed on that morning because my understanding is that God is not learning like science is. He knows. That spot of cancer on my back, the doctor said, I really didn't think it was cancer, but I thought, well, let's just be sure. So now I pray, oh God, help the doctor to see. So both pictures are really helpful. This is the way they fit together. Science is kind of like a 100-piece puzzle that fits into and is part of a larger, let's say, 1,000-piece puzzle. It's not two different pictures. It's one reality. But science really focuses on the physical reality. And the advances of what it's figured out has blessed our lives. And as I said, I'm grateful for it. But the picture of reality is bigger than just what science can discover. A week ago, my wife and I spent some time with a good friend who had suddenly and unexpectedly lost her husband. And as we talked, science has no answers for the tearful questions that she is struggling with. For that, we need a bigger picture. We need the faith picture for that one. You see, as long as the questions you are facing fit inside the 100-piece puzzle of science, you don't need a bigger picture to make sense of life. But the interesting thing about our minds is we just can't help asking the bigger questions of life. Questions like, what is my purpose and why do I matter? And is there any possible way that I could really be happy in a deep way, not just in I've had a good day way? And as our friend is wrestling with, what again happens after we die? The human mind throughout all of recorded history have asked these big questions, and science will never see that through a microscope. For those questions, you'll need to think beyond the helpful but limited borders of science. For me personally, I grew up hearing that the Bible is the true picture of life. But to be honest, I'd never done a lot of personal wondering about it. And I had done absolutely no wondering about the other faith pictures out on the market. Because the Bible isn't the only faith out there. There's other faiths that make the same claims the Bible does, that this is the way reality is. And I'd never looked into any of the other ones. And then in my early 20s, life stopped working for me. Not completely, but in some pretty significant ways. And I began personally to have big, big questions about me and about this world. And so for a little more than 2 years, I did a lot of wondering. I didn't do much talking. I did a lot of wondering, a lot of thinking. In that time, I read the Bible from cover to cover for the first time. I also read the Quran, which is the basis for the faith of Islam. I read the Bhagavad Gita, which is the early Sanskrit writings that produced Hinduism, and then from that, Buddhism. And I did a lot of other reading. And after 2 years, I personally concluded that the Bible was true, that it was the picture that fit reality. And then for the first time in my life, I actually began using the Bible to shape my thinking. I'd never done that before. And I began to construct my life and to put the puzzle pieces of my decisions together in line with the picture on the front of the box that the Bible says is there. Now, my conclusions are not going to help you, because my conclusions are my conclusions. Your conclusions have to be made by you. You have to do your own wondering, your own thinking. But I would encourage you, don't just parrot what people are saying and adopt that as your own thoughts. God did not create you to be a parrot. You are much smarter than a parrot. God gave you a mind so that you could come to your own conclusions. If you come to a different conclusion than mine, that's fine. Just think your way there. Don't parrot what other people are saying. Don't let pressure, peer pressure, force you into what other people are saying. And that's one of the challenges we face right now in thinking. Our culture is predominantly a speaking culture, not a thinking culture. Part of it is just the modern experience. We are a broadcast culture, not a let's take 5 hours to walk from point A to point B so we can think culture. We are a speaking culture, not a thinking culture. And the result is that while we may be sounding smarter and smarter, my concern is we may actually be becoming dumber and dumber. So wonder before you speak. And I think the second lesson from the Easter story is this: think before you decide. Think before you decide. Everybody knows you're supposed to think before you decide. That's why you have a brain. But we almost always decide and then use our thinking to justify what we've decided. That always leads to bad thoughts, bad thinking. And this is what happened to a group of people on that Easter. Unlike Peter, this group of individuals, their thinking was not at all impacted by the reports of the resurrection of Christ. It didn't faze them at all. It was as if it never had happened. Now, how is that possible? It's because they'd already made up their mind about Jesus a long time before the resurrection event occurred. And the reason they'd made up their mind about Jesus was not because they had actually taken time to wonder and ponder and investigate and come to a well-thought-out conclusion about Jesus. That's not why they'd made their decision earlier. No, they'd made up their minds for personal reasons. These were the religious leaders of the day. That's this group that I'm talking about. And for them, if Jesus really did rise from the dead, then he was who he'd claimed to be. He was God in flesh. And if that was true, the impact for them is they would lose power and a lot of money. And so you can understand in their way of thinking, that could never happen. So at that point, the data ceased to be relevant. They had personal reasons for not wanting Jesus to be who he claimed to be, and personal reasons for not wanting to accept the resurrection. So long before the resurrection occurred, they'd already decided. Now, everybody knows, like I said, you're supposed to think first and then decide, but we tend to be very much like them. We make decisions for personal reasons, and then we do our thinking after we've made our decision. Whenever we do that, there's usually two indicators. There's two evidences in our thinking that show up when we've decided first rather than thought first, before we've decided. The first evidence is we begin to only ask questions that support our decision. Questions look like you're thinking. They look like you're asking, you're trying to figure things out. But we have a way of asking questions that support a decision we've already made, and we're not really curious at all. This was true of the religious leaders. One segment of the religious leaders of that day were called Sadducees. They were kind of like a political party. I mean, they'd be like Republicans or Democrats in the ruling structure of the Jewish nation at the time. And long before the death and the resurrection of Christ, they kind of tipped their hat about their decision of Jesus. We read about it in Mark chapter 12, verse 18. This is what it says. Then the Sadducees, who, and here's the key, say there is no resurrection. Okay, decision made. There is no resurrection. They came to Jesus with a question. Now, you can read more about this question, but let me just summarize. This is the question. The question was a hypothetical one where there's one woman who's married to 7 men. Not all at once, but sequentially. So she is married first. That guy dies. She remarries. Husband 2, 3. This happens over again. 7 husbands. And so their question is, so Jesus, which of the 7 gets to be her husband in the resurrection? Now, let me ask you, is that an honest question, do you think? Do you think they actually knew some woman that had happened to? I mean, I guess it's possible. But this was a question designed to make a point, not to learn. What was the point? Well, the point, they said, is there is no resurrection. So here's an example of why we think there's no resurrection, because how would you figure out marriage for people that have had several spouses? Well, Jesus quickly answers that question and says, there's no marriage in the next life. Now, that may be a disappointment to you, but that's what Jesus said. Now, that should immediately go, oh, okay. But that didn't convince them of anything. It didn't change their minds at all because their minds are already made up. We do the same kind of thing. We ask questions that really aren't questions. For example, say you're married, you get in an argument, you're struggling in your marriage, which happens to all of us. Rather than get curious at that point and start thinking, what's going on, the tendency usually is to get defensive. And what that means is we've made a decision, and the decision is this: this is not my fault. This is on my spouse. This is their fault. And once you make that decision, then your brain goes to work to justify that decision. And sometimes we ask questions. See if you recognize these questions. Question number 1, am I supposed to do all the work around here? Okay, is that an honest question? No, that's a making a point question. Or another question, do you expect me to be perfect? Okay, is that an honest question? No, see, the answer to those questions are what? No. Obviously, I don't expect you to do all the work around it. Obviously, I don't expect you to be perfect. But the problem is, it covers up what the questions should be. The questions should be around what's going on between us? What's happening here? And what was my part in that so that I can address it? That's what a thinking person would do. But if we've already made the decision, not my fault, I'm not owning this, then we start asking questions that support our decision. You see, to ask honest questions, that requires a lot of humility and a lot of thought. And that tends to be in short supply for the human mind. The second evidence that we've already made our minds up, and now we're doing our thinking, is we're only interested in the facts that support our decision. You see this in those last 3 days of Jesus when he was put on trial, crucified, and then risen. In his trial, we read this, Mark chapter 14, 55 through 56. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, this is basically like the Congress, the whole group of religious leaders, they were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. They'd already made their minds up. Now they're doing their thinking. Problem was, they couldn't find any evidence. So, they made up stuff. Many testified falsely against him. Problem was, they'd put this thing together so fast, their statements they couldn't get their lies lined up. This is a hard thing. When you lie, it takes a lot of time to get it all lined up. And they couldn't get it lined up in time. So their statements, all the false statements didn't even agree. You see, they were looking for evidence against Jesus. What happened when they found none? Did that change their thinking? No. They proceeded anyway. Why? This was not about the facts. This was about the practicalities. Jesus was a practical threat to their daily life. And it's still true today. Jesus is a practical threat to our daily lives. We're not religious leaders. Well, I guess I am a little bit, but you're not. But Jesus is a threat to all of our lives. What I mean by that is if you decide to follow Jesus, he actually intends to change you. I mean, I'll just be honest. If you decide to follow Jesus Christ, he will mess with your life. And it will be the best thing that could have ever happened to you. But there'll be all kinds of moments when you're thinking, no, I want to hold on to this way of doing it and this way of thinking and that pattern. And Jesus says, no. And you're not going to be happy. And later you'll discover, oh, this is the best thing that could have happened to me or the best change I could have made. But it doesn't look like that going in. So Jesus intends to change you. The question is, what if you don't want to change? Or what if there's something in your life that you don't want to change? Well, then, you don't want Jesus to be true. You've already made your decision. And at that point, the intellectual evidence is irrelevant. It took me quite a while to learn this because my own journey to making the decision for me to follow Jesus was pretty much an intellectual one. I mean, those 2 years, I did all this reading and research. I uncovered so much evidence and so many reasons to believe this that I thought, oh my goodness, if I just tell people this stuff, if I just point out the evidence, they're going to be, oh, yes, we have to follow Jesus. So I would make my case again and again and again, and I kept running across people who were like, yeah, that's fine. So do you want to follow Jesus? No. Well, did I not explain it? Oh, no, it makes sense. Well, why don't you want to follow Jesus? And it'll come down to something in their life that they didn't want to change. And what I learned at that point is that's the issue. If there's something in your life that you don't want to change, you probably have a sense Jesus might want you to change that, and you're right. I mean, we're not dumb. We have minds, and we know if I decide to follow Jesus, I probably can't do this anymore, and I probably can't handle this anymore, and I want to keep doing this. So at that point, the intellectual evidence is irrelevant. People could show you so much evidence, it would blow your mind, and it doesn't matter. Because, like those leaders back then, you've already made your mind up. So when the word got back to these religious leaders that the tomb was empty, their response was pretty predictable. Matthew 28, 11 through 13 records it. It says, while the women were on their way, so I just had read earlier, the women were heading to tell the disciples, hey, there's no body in this tomb anymore, and the stone, this giant stone that had been sealed is gone. It's laying on the side, it's been rolled away. So the women were telling the disciples, while they were on their way, some of the guards, see, the Roman guards had been posted to make sure this story didn't happen. They went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met, now you'd think at that point they'd go, oh my goodness, we have been wrong. Oh no. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, you are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. Now that's incredible. This just shows you how the human mind works, all of our minds. The chief priests knew this story wasn't true because they had made it up. So the question I have is, what do you think they thought really happened to the body? I mean, they had to at least wonder, what in the world? Where did it go? We're going to make this story up so we can stay in power, but what happened to the body? I mean, these are Roman soldiers. They don't fall asleep. They guard because if they don't guard well and they fall asleep, they're put to death. They're serious about guarding. So what happened to that body? I mean, how could they ignore a firsthand report from Roman soldiers? Well, you can ignore pretty much anything when the price of considering it is higher than you want to pay. These men would lose a lot if they admitted that he rose from the dead, so they ignored absolutely overwhelming facts. What is wrong with them? Well, to be honest, it's the same thing that's often wrong with our thinking. Once we decide that we want something, the quality of our thinking goes down, and we start doing the lowest quality thinking of all, which is called justifying. We live in a time that's full of talking heads. And with all of that noise, it's really hard to do much thinking, wondering. We live in a time when all of the thinking is done for us, and we are told what to think. But God has given each one of us a mind, and He intends for us to use it to think, to wonder, before we open our mouths and tell everyone what we think, and to think before we make our decisions. What we need is a dose of humility. 1 Corinthians 8:2 again. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. This, as I said, is the theme verse of the new message series that we're starting today, called simply Think. We're not as smart as we like to think we are. And as I said, my concern is, while we are maybe sounding smarter and smarter, we, I think, are getting dumber and dumber. So over the next 5 Sundays, we're going to be considering the main challenges that we face in this time when it comes to how we think about life. My hope and prayer is that we can knock off some of our thinking cobwebs together. And my hope and prayer is that you can join us and think with us on this journey. Let's pray. Jesus, we bow before you. For most of us, our risen Lord. We thank you for all of the evidence that you have left for anyone who would want to consider it. We thank you for your patience with us, and we admit that we often come to decisions for personal reasons, and then we think afterwards. And we admit that we are so quick to spout off our big ideas that we haven't actually thought much about. We have become a culture that knows what to say, but doesn't know why we're saying it. So I pray that you would speak to our minds. You have given us minds so that we might know you and know truth. But it's very easy for our minds to believe a lie. We ask that you would help us to discover what is true. Because out of what we think, we build a life. And out of the life that we build, we shape an eternity. Help us, we pray, to think. We ask this now in the name of Jesus Christ, our risen Lord. Amen. Elliot?
Thanks, Bevan. That was really helpful. As Bevan said, today was the first in this message series, Think. We're going to be diving into these ideas more in the coming weeks. We've got 5 more weeks of this series. So I want to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering over the coming Sundays. Next week, we're going to be, the title of the message is My Truth, an Exercise in Futility. We're going to look at that idea, how that's presented to us, some of the challenges that it creates for us. Then the following week after that, we're going to look at the American dream and ask the question, is it really all it's cracked up to be? Does it really lead to the happiness that it promises? Then Glow People, we're going to look at technology, some of the impacts it has on our thinking. Ahistorical is on May 2nd, where we're going to be looking at, there's kind of 2 main ideas floating around about how to view history, and we're going to look at those and also the benefits of viewing history the way God intends for us to. And then we're going to wrap up with a message called Shut Up, from hashtags to conversations, which I think is going to be really insightful as well. So something I would encourage you to do as we dive into this series is make Sundays a priority. Make attending worship service top of your list every Sunday. Come to the entire series. Be here with us if you can. And also think through who you might be able to invite. If there's family members or friends who you think might find these topics interesting or benefit from them, we'd encourage you to invite them. Again, we're very glad that you guys decided to carve out time on your Easter to join us. It's been a great Sunday. We've got a photo wall outside. Take a photo with whoever you came with today. And again, we're glad you joined us. If you'll stand with us, we'll wrap up and sing our final song.
was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my turn till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. And all my failures I tried to hide. It was my turn till I met you. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. Your mercy has saved my soul. And now your freedom is all that I know. The old me knew Jesus when I met you. Let's sing that again. And now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old me knew Jesus when I met you. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. Say, I needed rescue. My sin was heavy, the chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you call my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. Thank you so much for joining us today. You guys have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much again for joining us on Easter. If you want to learn more about who we are as a church or give, you can do all that through the website, seabreezechurch.com. Before you log off today, I would encourage you to stick around for the chat. We're going to leave that open for a little bit so you can let us know what stood out to you. You can see what others say in that as well. It can be a really encouraging time. And to make sure that you don't miss any new content from us, click subscribe and then hit the bell icon on YouTube so that you're notified of anything that we put out. We're glad you joined us again for Easter, and we hope to see you next week.